So hello, everyone. Thanks a lot for joining our webinar today. My name is Alisa. I'm marketing lead at Crimson Education. And today, me and my colleague Caitlin are very excited to talk to you about the last spring for Masters and MBA rounds and share tips on essay and interview preparation. But before we start, please write in the chat if you can hear and see me well. And during the webinar, you can use this chat box for questions and any technical support you need. The webinar will last approximately 40 minutes, and at the end of it, we will have a Q&A session, so don't be shy to ask anything you would like to know about last spring for Masters and MBA rounds. So yeah, let me first introduce who we are. So Crimson Education is the world's largest university admission support network. We help students all around the world get into the best fit universities by creating personalized teams comprised of the top tutors, mentors, and admissions experts. At Crimson, we follow a holistic approach, which means that we offer customized programs of support with all aspects of the university admissions process. Next slide, please. We work with mentors from top universities around the world, so with their support, our students are 4 times as likely to get into the target dream universities like Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, Oxford, Cambridge, and many more. Next slide, please. Yeah, so here you can see universities that our students are successfully applied to. And now let me introduce my colleague and today's host, Caitlin Andersen. Caitlin is a postgraduate strategist at Crimson Education. She's also a professional member of the Association of International Graduate Admissions Consultants, associate member of the Independent Educational Consultants Association, and Oxford MBA graduate. So Caitlin, thank you so much for hosting this webinar, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alisa. I am very happy to be here to talk to everyone about MBA essays and interviews. So this is an outline of what we're going to go through in this presentation. We'll start with an introduction where I will lay the groundwork for you and get us into the right mindset. Then I'm going to move on to talking about your profile. After that, we'll move on to discussing how to write very competitive essays, and we will highlight the 6 steps to write outstanding MBA essays. From there, we're going to move on to interview preparation. And then I will give you some application hacks and insider tips. After that, I'll turn it back over to Alisa so she can talk to you about how Crimson can support you. Then we'll wrap up with our Q&A session. All right. Before we dive into each main section that we want to cover today, I want to explain a bit more about why we need to discuss your profile before we can move into essays and interviews. You need to understand what schools want and how you can be competitive against other applicants. So that's what we will do in the profile section. Then we can move on to discussing essays, and I will help you set a very specific narrative. Then we'll talk about outlining and then writing your first draft. And then I will give you rules that I use and my students use to write very compelling essays. Then I'll give you the system. After that, I'm going to move into interviews. So I'll give you a breakdown of the necessary stages of interview preparation. And then I'm going to give you my winning formula for answering questions in interviews. And then after that, I'll discuss a little bit about the difference in interviews that you will see along the MBA application journey. All right, my first very important point is essays and interviews are all about showcasing your EQ, your emotional intelligence. You've already made your case for your IQ in your GPA, in your resume, in your GMAT score, in your professional certifications. So now you need to make a case for your emotional intelligence. That is how you understand yourself, how you understand others around you, and how you manage the emotional side of life. The admissions committees are no longer evaluating your technical skills or intellectual ability in these two aspects of the application. So what they want to know is, do you have the character to handle very difficult situations, such as an MBA program? Also, are you likable? Will people enjoy interacting with you in the MBA program? So please let this sink in, because if you fixate on your IQ in the essays and interview portion of your application, you will be missing out on the opportunity to stand out amongst your competitors, because it is extremely competitive out there, and there are thousands of other equally technically qualified individuals that you're competing against. So keep this in mind as we go through this presentation. All right, let's talk about your profile first. Before I interviewed with Oxford, I met with two Saïd Business School professors to get their insights into the interview. And I'll never forget what one of those professors told me. He said, remember, schools are businesses, so answer questions and ask questions based on that understanding.
Hi, Caitlin.
Yes.
This is the Abhijit from GMAT Club. Sorry to interrupt, but I don't think the text in this table is barely readable. That's because it's a very faint font. Is it possible to fix it?
Yes. Give me one moment. Is that better?
Yeah, Caitlin, I think it's better.
Okay. So let's go ahead. What I was saying was that the professor I spoke with gave me the advice to remember that schools are businesses, and to frame my questions and my answers according to that understanding. And that's something that I've carried through after business school and throughout my career with helping students gain admission to the top schools, because I see that it's something that most applicants will not remain cognizant of, and that's a shame, because we tend to think of schools as nonprofit entities because their product is education, and education is normally government subsidized and or heavily endowed by very successful business individuals, which is very similar to how a charitable foundation operates. However, business schools have very strategic profit-oriented goals. So remain aware of that. You'll see here in this table the way that schools will build their brands. And you'll see the way that you can put your information and see how you stack up and if you will improve their brand. So the first example is schools want to maintain very high GPA averages. So if your GPA average is higher than their class average, that means you would be improving their brand. If your GMAT average is higher than theirs or on par with their GMAT average, usually the competitive business schools, it's 720, 730 plus. So if you have a very competitive GMAT score, then you will increase their brand. So when you start to go back on your own and think through how you can build your profile, I would give you the advice to make this table. Write out these 7 different ways that schools will build their brand, and then enter your information on the right-hand side. Then you can start to identify areas where you may have a star factor or the opportunity to stand out. So for example, if you work at a very prestigious company already and you have a lot of responsibility, that is a star factor. That means you should probably highlight it in your narrative and in your essays and when you interview. Okay, so let's move on to the next part, which is I want to give you an understanding of how schools will create the narrative. I really love how this graphic illustrates the narrative. Each one of these circles is an application component. I want you to pay attention to the difference in size and color for these circles. So the smaller, lighter circles are not going to factor as heavily into the narrative as the larger, darker circles will. So you'll notice that essays are in the largest, darkest circle, meaning they carry the most weight in your application. Essays have the ability to overcome a low GPA, a low GMAT score, weaker references, maybe a lack of publications or activities. I'm gonna say that one more time because I really want it to sink in. Essays have the ability to overcome these other areas of your application. So give them the time and attention they deserve. Next, you'll see that GPA and GMAT are also an important factor. They are going to prove that you can handle the academic rigor of the programs you're applying to. Then you'll see that the resume will show your technical abilities and whether you are marketable, which is going to be important for schools because they want to make sure that you can get a job post-graduation. So what I see most of my students do, where they trip up essentially, is they will fixate on the GMAT at the expense of their essays, and they'll leave the essays to the last minute to where they have maybe a month or less to write the essay. I recommend do not do this. They absolutely need to be given the time and attention that they warrant, being a very important part of the application. Okay, I want to just briefly give you an idea for what a successful MBA applicant can look like. This was actually one of my students recently who was admitted to Oxford, INSEAD, and ESA. And what I want to bring your attention to first is that we've given her a title, and it's called the Socially Minded Engineer. If you can start with some similar small title and build your narrative based on that, it might be a great way for you to go. The narrative, you can see below, we've listed her short-term, long-term goals and her personal attachment to those goals. Underneath that, we've just highlighted some of her work experience, the honors that she received, any leadership opportunities and situations that she shined in. And then off to the left, we have her stats. So this is just to give you a brief snapshot of what an MBA applicant can look like and to help you start thinking about how to build your own profile. Okay, so in the essays, let's go ahead and talk very deeply about your narrative because this is the crucial point in building your application, your essays, and interviewing well. A strong narrative has 4 main important components. First, you need to identify your short-term goal. This is what you will do immediately post-graduation and then for the next 5 to 10 years. And it needs to be highly specific. You need to mention one company, one actual role that exists that you will take, a department, and an area or focus that you will have, the sector you want to highlight. So I would recommend going and doing research on companies you'd like to join, go to their careers page and look at actual roles that exist within that company, read the descriptions and ask yourself, is it feasible that I could be in this role post MBA? And then pick one. But make sure you don't say in your essays, I would like to join McKinsey, Bain, Boston. You need to pick one company. After you set your short-term goal, then you're going to move on to setting your long-term goal. And this is going to be what you do from graduation, from the 10-year point onward. This also needs to be highly specific. You need to mention a company or organization that you want to join, the specific role you will take, the sector you're going to focus on, and what problem you will solve there. Or you should mention a company you want to start. And in that, you need to talk about the problem your company is going to solve in the world or in your industry. And you need to give specific examples about how your company will help you solve that problem, help the world. Now, the important point about the long-term goals is you must have a social component in your long-term goal, meaning how are you going to make the world a better place? I can tell you that admissions committees do not care about people who do not care about the world. So you must have a social component in your long-term goal. Okay, so once you set your short-term and your long-term goal, now you need to begin writing down stories that are very personal to you that will show the admissions committees that you have always had this connection, this attachment to your goals. So if you sit there and you start thinking about stories and you're not emotionally moved by what you're writing out, you're on the wrong track. You need to do a self-reflection, deep dive and understand, when did I start caring about the things I say I want to do short-term and long-term? This is the hardest part for most of my students and for most applicants in general. You'll see that it's uncomfortable to think about those transformational experiences that you had that made you who you are. So if you start feeling really emotional, maybe you're angry or it makes you sad, or maybe you're very happy and excited. If you start to feel a strong emotion when you're writing out a story, you're on the right track. That will prove that to the admissions committee, you do actually care about these causes. So if you feel it, the admissions committees will feel it too. And that's when it's a valuable story to include. Once you have your stories, then you're going to go on to looking into your background and finding evidence. So specific things, activities that you've done throughout time, not within just the last month or two, but for the last years, that will prove that you have always had these goals. So it could be volunteering activities that you did. It could be you joined a professional association. Maybe you wrote your bachelor's thesis on the topic that will be surrounding your goals. But the goal is to find at least 1 to 3 of those that you can use in your essays and in your interviews to talk about, so that you can prove to the admissions committees that you will actually pursue the goals that you're saying you will pursue. Okay, so that's the groundwork for setting your narrative. Now, let me tell you how to actually do it, your plan of action. You're going to write down 4 columns. The first one is your short-term goals. Second is your long-term goals. Third is your personal attachment, the stories. And then fourth is your evidence, the actual activities. So let's start looking at the short-term goal. So you need to find one company. Here I've listed an actual company that exists, McKinsey & Company. The department, there is an actual ESG department here. The role, senior business analyst. It's possible for somebody with a certain year of working experience and with an MBA. You want to be promoted to the engagement manager, which is actually the career path you would take. And then I've identified the area, which is they want to focus on projects in renewable energy. Okay, so if you can't find an actual role that exists at your company, then I would suggest you go on LinkedIn and find current working employees at that company and reach out to them and ask them about the career progression and how things would work at that firm. You absolutely need to have a specific company for your long-term goal, because if you mention 2 or 3 or just an industry, it looks like you don't have a plan. And the admissions committees will admit people who have clear goals, clear plans. So after you set your short-term goal, you're going to move on to thinking about your long-term goal. So the truth about the long-term goal is no one can know what you're going to do in 10 years or in 15 years, not even you. So, and the admissions committees are not going to track you down after 10 years and compare your life to your essays and say, that looks like you didn't exactly follow your plan. So they're not going to follow you and see that you actually followed that plan. So you have to make your best guess about what you want to do. So your long-term goal should be grand, meaning it's going to solve a really important problem. It should be feasible, so it's actually possible for you to solve this problem, and you should be excited by it. And that's how you know that you're on the right track for the long-term goal. So in this example, we've identified that the applicant wants to create an impact investment firm. The role they want to take is to be the fund manager, and they want to focus on environmental issues, so maybe agri-tech or something similar. So once you set your 2 goals, then your next step is to write down your stories. So this is the hard part. Take the time to really dig deep. It may take a few days. It may take a few weeks. I can tell you that with my students, I usually get to know them for the first maybe 4 months before I really get to the good stories, the ones that are so important to them that maybe they've hid them, that they don't want to share them with people. And so those are the stories that will be so engaging for the admissions committee. So I would say take the time to get your stories out to understand why are you motivated to do the things you're saying that you want to do. Then you need to write down the specific evidences. So I'll give you an example. Say your long-term goal is to start a social impact investment fund, and you want to focus your efforts on supporting companies and organizations that will promote ocean sustainability. Proper evidence for that story or for that long-term goal would be maybe you volunteered picking up litter on the beaches, or maybe you helped out marine life somehow, or perhaps you completed a sustainability internship, or you wrote your thesis on ocean sustainability or some important related aspect of it. But there should be actual things from your past at various moments that show that you have always really tended towards this cause. Now, if you can't find the evidence, you have 2 options. The first option is get evidence. So go out, join nonprofit organizations, start volunteering, join a professional organization, take a leadership role. You could ask for projects in your current company that are in alignment with your long-term goal. But if you don't have the time or that's not feasible, your other option is you need to change your goals. You cannot have goals that you don't have any evidence for, because they will not be believable by the admissions committees. You'll say, I want to do these things. And the thought is, okay, but where's the proof? So make sure that you find that evidence. Okay, so now you have your narrative set. You're ready to outline. So if you're not aware already, most of the MBA applications will include essay prompts that overlap. So you'll be asked, some of the 3 main essay prompts are, what are your career aspirations, which are your short-term and long-term goals? How will you contribute to the community? And why the MBA program? So for this example, let's create an outline for the essay prompt. What are your short-term and long-term goals, and how will the MBA program help you achieve those goals? Your first step is to state your theme. This is going to be 1 to 2 sentences long, and it's going to be your attention grabber at the top. It's its own paragraph. So let me give you an example of a really good state your theme moment. High quality education is not accessible to girls in rural Indian villages. This needs to change. That's it. That's your attention grabber at the very top. You're stating your problem, what you want your long-term goal to solve. That's what you say right up front, because it grabs my ear as a reader. Oh, okay. This person's going to talk about girls and not having education accessible in rural villages in India. I wonder what they're going to say. How are they going to solve it? That starts it off very strongly. Then you're going to move into sharing your career plan, which is you say immediately what your long-term goal is first. That's how you're ultimately planning to solve this problem you just said. So the long-term goal needs to come first. And you would say something like, my ultimate career aspiration is to, start a social impact consultancy that will help nonprofit organizations in India give access to girls for education, something like that. And then you need to give a little bit more detail there if you're starting a firm about how your firm is going to operate. What kinds of projects are you going to invest in? Then after you talk a little bit about your ultimate career aspiration, your long-term goal, then you move into your short-term goal. And that should obviously relate to your long-term goal. Then you're going to go and you're going to start showing the evidence. So we're at number 4 now, we're going to start with your story. So that's where you're going to give about 1 to 2 paragraphs of telling your personal story, your attachment to the goals that you have. This is going to prove to the admissions committees that you are dedicated to your plan. Then after you tell your story, then you're going to go on to giving your specific examples, which is your evidence of the fact that you will pursue your goals. After that, you arrive at a moment, which is usually the present day, where you don't have enough knowledge or experience to be able to accomplish your long-term goal. And that's why you need the MBA program. So that's how you transition. So after you've said, I've done all these things to try to move towards my goals, but now I'm here. I need more knowledge. I need more leadership experiences to be able to accomplish my goals. That's when you start talking about Oxford's MBA program will provide me with the knowledge and technical expertise I need and leadership experiences, and then you go on. So then you're going to mention very specific courses. So you need to go to the school's website and you need to find the names of the courses and read their descriptions and understand which ones would actually be very valuable to you to accomplish your goals. So where is the gap in your knowledge? Can you find that, identify it, call it out? You name the courses. Then you can also, if you have the word count, name a professor that's actually at that school that you would enjoy interacting with. Someone that has done research in the area that you would like to pursue long term. And you should actually name, I would enjoy interacting with Professor so-and-so. Their research on this A, B, and C has informed my knowledge of this area. I believe we could share many interesting conversations. Then you move on to talking about student clubs. So you would go to the school's website, find the actual names of the clubs and put that in your essay and say, I would join this club, the name. As a VP of communications, I'd organize several events and so you're showing that you're going to find the right experiences that you need to be able to be prepared to accomplish your short and long-term goals. So after you've done that, then the 6th step is you're going to refer back to your theme and you're going to say, with the Oxford MBA, I will have the ability to, and then you'll say what your theme is and what your plan is. And you always end on a positive note about the future, how the world would be a better place at the end. Okay, so that's the rundown of an outline for a question of what are your short-term and long-term goals, and how will our MBA help you achieve those goals? So once you get that outline down, next, you need to start writing the first draft. So just get all your ideas out there. Go section by section and start writing. Once you have all sections, you need to read through it and try to make it coherent, because a lot of times we'll put things in and we'll go back and read and realize, okay, that didn't make sense. After you get the first draft pretty good, now this is where I usually send this essay checklist to my students, and it has 14 key points. And I tell them, read your essay through 14 times, asking yourself each one of these points. So first, was I concise? Check. Okay, read it again. Did I use transitions everywhere? Okay, check. Did I strike the right tone? Check. And go through the list and make sure that each one of these is definitely true for you. So most of these are pretty intuitive. You want to remain within the word limits. Don't go over. You want to keep short paragraphs. That's also an error that I see a lot of people run into. For example, there are some that are not so intuitive. Like, you don't want to make anyone or anything look bad in your essay. Another one is when you mention an award you received or one of your accomplishments, you need to mention your gratitude with it. And the fact that you understood that this was possible through the wonderful community of the support that you had around you, which is true. You didn't do it on your own. And that will show your emotional intelligence. And that you realize that this award meant that other people saw value in your pursuit, whatever it was you were promoting. If you got an award for a pitch competition, or if you wrote a great bachelor thesis, it means that whatever you were passionate about doing in that moment, it had value for others. And that was what gave you the most fulfillment. So that's just one of these points that you need to think about as you're writing your essays. Okay, for the sake of time, I'm going to move on. The next phase of writing is once you've gone through those 14 points and you've answered yes to each one of them. Now you need to begin the final review, which is 10 times through, at least. I tell my students, you read your essay all the way through. If you change one little thing, you're not done. You need to read it again until you don't change anything. Because what happens is when we start writing and we rewrite, we edit, we move things around, we keep editing it. That means that we're not satisfied with how we're communicating our ideas, meaning there's probably a better way to say what you want to say. And I would go with that. Don't stop just because you're tired of writing or the essays are not your thing or whatever it is that would be preventing you from writing continually. I would say, read it all the way through, start to finish. If you don't change a single comma or a period or anything, then it's done. You're ready to go. A lot of times I'll tell my students to walk away for a few days, come back to it next week, sit down from a new perspective. You've gone through a week of life. Now you're sitting down with a new perspective. See if you would change anything. And a lot of times you end up changing. Oh, wow, that sounds weird. I don't like the way that sounds. So that's why I say give it the time and space that it needs. All right, so let's talk about interviewing. Step one is to do your research. The more time that you spend researching your school, the program, your interviewer, and the interview format, the better off you will be in your interview. So, in the context of graduate school interviews, you need to learn everything you can about the school that you are interviewing with. So that means how long have they existed? How old is the business school? What are the worldwide rankings for that school? What notable alumni and faculty are there? And any recent news about that school you should be aware of. Then you should move on to doing a deep dive on the program. So that means go to the school's website, click on the curriculum side, which it might be under academics, but you drop it down and you see exactly what courses are offered and you read the descriptions. You could get an even deeper dive if you went to the course catalog on the websites, which I do with my students. I tell them, go to the course catalog, read the descriptions, and see exactly what you're going to be learning in that program. And then write down specific course names that you know you want to take advantage of. So if you have a certain amount of electives, you should choose your electives. You should also know if that program has a concentration that you'd like to take advantage of. So you can mention it in the interview and it'll look like you've done your research, which is absolutely what you need to do. You should also know if internships are included in your program, if you get credit for it, or if there are other study abroad opportunities you can take advantage of. You should know if your school has specific conferences that you would want to attend that would feed into your long-term goal. Because when you're interviewing, if they ask you, why do you want to attend our school and our program specifically? You can mention that conference as part of the reason. You can say, I'm just really enthralled with this conference and I would love to be a part of it. It's a great way to score some points. Next, you can talk about the corporate partners that the school has. So you should do your research and find out, what companies does the school partner with for consulting projects, for instance. You can mention that in your interviews. You should also know by name the student clubs for each of the programs that you're going to interview with. So you can mention those by name and not just generally. You need to be very specific and say, I want to join ABC Club and I'd like to be the vice president of external partnerships or whatever the actual title is. Then you should also know about their centers. So do they have a specific center that would feed into your long-term goal? So as you can see, I'm always relating back to the goals. What did you say you want to do in your essays? That's what you're going to promote in your interviews. Next, you're going to research your interviewer. So you'll take some time to go through their background, understand their undergraduate degree, what did they major in, what was their work history. So what companies did they work for? What roles did they take? You also want to know extracurriculars that they've been involved in so that maybe there's something that overlaps in your background. So every time I'm reading about my interviewer, I'm getting ideas about what would interest them to talk about and where can I strategically make points that I know their ears will perk up. So that's why it's important to do the deep dive on your interviewer. I'm going to give you just a quick example of some really good advice I got. I have an uncle who's a very successful businessman. He was coaching me on how to interview for a private equity firm that wanted to hire me to be a COO of a new venture capital vehicle. He told me, over prepare. Read, if the person has a book out, read it. And actually in this case, the interviewer had written a book about real estate. So I read his book. So in the interview, I knew what his ideas were. I knew his background and what had led him through his career. And I knew most likely what he would enjoy talking about. And that's what eventually led to the offer. Okay, then you need to look at the interview format. So you need to do your research and find out how long is it going to be? Is it 30 minutes or 45 minutes? What's the medium? So is it going to be in person, online, through Zoom, through Skype, and be aware of that so that you prevent any technical issues. You should also research the question type that is most common for that program's interviews. Okay, let me move on to, now you've done your research. How do you actually answer questions? You need a structure. So you should always answer questions with an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. In your introduction, you will directly answer the question being asked. Then in your body, you will give reasons or examples for the claims that you made in your introduction. Then in your conclusion, you are going to ideally show insights that you had about those situations and showcase your emotional intelligence. So in the body, when you want to give examples or evidence of the claims that you're making, you should use what I call the STARL method. This is my own personal modification of the STAR method, which most of you will be familiar with, but I've added an L for lessons learned at the end. So the way it works is you tell a story by setting up the situation. You tell them, where was it? When was it? Who was involved? Then you go into talking about the challenge or the problem. So you'll give them what the task at hand was. You move into what your solution was or the action you took. and you explain how you got there, because schools want to understand how you think. Then you're going to move into the R, which is the result. So you're going to show what was actually affected by your action. Did the company gain new clients? Did they start a new revenue stream? Did you get praised by your supervisor? What was the result there? Then you add the L, which is you talk about the insight and how you understand that the experience that you just had affected you personally, the growth that was made, and how now you approach the world differently. And you could see how that factors into other areas of life. So this is where you can really highlight your emotional intelligence and where you can score points and stand out above others. So I would encourage you to not omit that L when you give an example. All right, so now you have your structure. Let's talk about how to actually practice. You need to say your answers out loud for hours. I know it sounds a lot, but I'm telling you, the more you get used to hearing yourself speak out loud, the better you will be in the moment when you're under pressure, because you already know what questions you're going to be asked. Why the MBA? Why now? What are your strengths and weaknesses? So practice saying it out loud. I'll tell you a secret that when I was interviewing for the MBA programs, I wrote out my answers to these questions word for word. And I practiced aloud for hours, getting used to hearing myself say it and creating those mental pathways so that in the interview, I could very naturally speak about my experiences and answer the questions well. So if you have any tendency to go off on tangents or not be laser focused when you're talking, you should absolutely write out the answer that you have word for word and memorize it to the point that it becomes very natural to speak it. Okay, now let's talk about the different kinds of interviews that you're going to encounter in the MBA application process. So first of all, you'll have a regular interview, which is usually by invitation, and it would be in person or you would do it online. And that would be with either a member of the admissions committee or some alumni, or maybe it would be a second year MBA student. So you'll use your structure, you'll do your research, and you'll prepare for that interview. I would suggest that you go online and Google it. There is a lot of information out there about the kinds of questions people were asked, and you'll see who got in, who didn't, how did it work. So do that for the regular interview. But I want to talk a lot today about the Kira interview, because this one has been included in most business school programs, not just for MBA students, but it's becoming very common. So most likely you'll have to do a Kira interview. If you're not already aware, the Kira interview is an online video interview that you are timed on. So you are usually given 30 seconds to 1 minute to read a question, think about your answer, and then the camera comes on and you have to now give your response. And you usually have 1 minute to 3 minutes to respond. So the most challenging part about the Kira interview is that you're timed. You see the timer counting down, and that throws everyone off. I've never seen someone in a practice session with me come to it and perfectly answer within that time frame. It's just very difficult because it's not like normal life. So what I would tell you is when you practice, go online, find the Kira sample interview questions, and there'll be a range of them. Schools will use behavioral questions. They'll use random personality-based questions. They'll use questions about their university, about your future goals. So find out what kinds of questions the school that you're interviewing with and doing the Kira assessment has used. Then get your phone, get your computer, and time yourself and say it out loud. So sit there and give yourself 30 seconds to read the question and think about what you're going to say. Reset the timer for 1 minute, and you have to say it within 1 minute. My recommendation for this is to, at the 5-second mark, you make sure that that's the last time you've spoken. So just give yourself that 5 seconds to just kind of trail off. It's better if you don't try to fill the time at the end. I see everyone doing that. Don't try to fill that time. End. If you're 10 seconds or less to the end of the timer running out, just end. If you try to fill, it'll look like you're scrambling and it doesn't look like you're in control. which is what they want to see, that under pressure, when everyone's thrown off, you can manage yourself and you can structure, you can give good examples, and then you can end very eloquently under time. Okay, so some of the Kira assessments will also have the writing component, which usually what happens is you will have 3 to 4 minutes to read the question. You won't be, they won't turn the camera on, but you'll read the question and then you'll go through and start writing. And you should use the same structure that I gave you before: introduction, body, conclusion. In your intro, you give your answer right up front. In your body, you're going to give examples and proof of the claims that you're making in your introduction, and then wrap it up with a conclusion. So don't worry about the Kira assessment. It's not going to make or break your application, but if you can practice ahead of time and come off really strongly, it will help your application. So let's go ahead. I'm now going to give you some application hacks and tips. Schools absolutely have an ideal candidate in mind in terms of character traits. They want people who are emotionally mature. They want people who are grateful and enthusiastic and have lots of career potential. They want to see that you can laugh at yourself and that you're very innovative. And these are just examples of some of the characteristics that they prefer. But what I would recommend to you is think about these characteristics and try to understand which ones you have naturally. If you're very charismatic, for instance, that's a natural characteristic they want. And play that up as much as possible in your essays and in your interviews, because that's what they want to know, is that you have some of these characteristics that they want to see in their classes. All right. I'm going to end by giving you a few of the tips that I always give my students when they're going to interview. The first one is to be confident in your technical abilities. If you've been invited to interview, that means that they are no longer questioning whether you can actually do the program. So your technical ability is not in question. It's now about, are you someone they want to associate with? So that's why I've been really heavily weighting the emotional intelligence side of this. Because if you can relax and remain calm about your ability to be there, you'll be far more able to produce a very good result in your interview. The second piece of advice I always give is to talk to as many people as you can before you interview, especially alumni from that program. You'll find new insights that you didn't know about that school, about the culture, about things that they enjoyed, and ask them deep questions. Like ask them, how did the MBA program change you? That's huge. You would love to know about how people have evolved and where the growth happened. You can ask them things about, what did you not know about the program that you ended up finding very valuable while you were in it? So find out those things, because in the interviews, you'll be able to mention something like that, or you'll be able to come from a more informed place. So I would definitely advise you to do that. And finally, something that I always tell my students is, remember this, that the opportunities that are meant for you will come through. So there's no guesswork involved there anymore. And if you can really internalize that belief, you will be very relaxed in the interview process. And who knows, maybe you will actually come to enjoy it. So I will leave you there. I'm going to turn it back over to Alisa, and she's going to talk to us about how Crimson can support you along your journey.
Thank you so much, Caitlin, for these fantastic tips and insights. And I really hope you guys will use these hacks in preparation for your last master's and MBA rounds. And now I want to share with you how we at Crimson can help you to achieve your goals and get into your dreams programs and universities. So Crimson does an incredible job of covering all fronts of the application process. Next slide, please. To build a candidacy for the top schools, you need to have a powerful package. And to do this, you might need like tutoring, career mentoring, CV optimization, and interview skills. And in Crimson, we really help you with every part of the application process to ensure that you're presenting the best version of you. Next slide, please. When you work with Crimson, you are provided with an entire team of support. So your Crimson strategist oversees the entire process from start to finish and helps you plan out your path, including recommending the best options for your strengths and your skills. Your education coordinator tracks your progress and satisfaction. And depending on your unique circumstances, you might have like a tutor or a leadership mentor or another mentor. And now let's see how your journey with Crimson look like. So first, we will create this call list together with like all the details about the program lengths, rankings, requirements, acceptance rates, GMAT average, etc. At this time, we will also discuss whether there are specific scholarships you would like to apply for or not. Then we will move right into developing your narrative and gathering the supporting evidence for it. Like this is, I guess, the hardest part of the application as it requires a lot of self-reflection. We go back and forth through video sessions, emails, messages, trying to like narrow down your goals and personal attachment to them. At the same time, we should discuss your testing strategy since it like takes a significant portion of time, especially when you're taking the GMAT test. After these tasks are completed, we move on to the details of each application as they actually will vary from school to school. And you will first create your application account so we can get specific about what the actual requirements are, and they're usually different from what is listed on the school website. And then we will need to look through your transcript and begin your CV. So your references and essays are typically the last components we work on. And once you submit them, we will help you prepare you for your interviews if they're required to complete. So this is actually how your journey looks like. And just remember that you won't be alone on this journey. And on the next slide, here are some of Crimson's master's result from 2017-2022. And we're really proud of the quality of work we produce. And we hope to have the opportunity to learn about you and your background and actually help you to navigate this graduate school journey. And in order to get a free guide about all our postgraduate options and sign up for a free consultation, you can scan QR code that you will see on the next slide. Yes, here. And now we are actually ready to answer any of your questions. So please write them down into the chat box and I will check whether we have any questions so far. I guess probably, Caitlin, I have one question, and probably this is like very generic. So when do you think it's reasonable to start this preparation for the last rounds and where it's reasonable to ask for support?
For essays or for the whole process?
Well, let's say for the whole process.
Okay. The ideal time to start getting support is at least a year before you're going to actually submit your applications. And that's because it takes the time to build your evidence, to set your narrative. Like I was saying, it took usually 4 to 6 months for me to know my students so well to where they would feel comfortable sharing details about their life that were going to be very important to include in the application. So that just takes time. And then to actually start writing the essays, you usually want to start 4 months or so before the deadlines, because then you give yourself ample time to go back and forth. And with your Crimson strategist, you can go back and forth and talk to us about, oh, I feel like this doesn't show me in the best light, or I had another idea over here, maybe we could add it. So you need that time to be able to incorporate all the feedback that we would give you and that you would think of yourself. So I would say start a year. Start your essays at least 4 months before, but not too far before, because if you start writing too far before, you'll be adding experiences over the year that will change what you write about in your essay. So it would be, there would be no point to start so soon.
Yeah. Well, we are still waiting for the questions in the chat. So do you have any unsuccessful examples of taking interviews that you learned a lot from them?
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you asked. I do have a time when I failed. So the first year that I applied to MBA programs, I didn't have a strategist. I didn't know anything about the process. I just went at it. And I applied 2 months after I found the programs, which was a big no-no. So I was offered to interview with Chicago Booth. So that was huge. That meant, okay, I'm in the range, which is good. But I didn't do enough research on my interviewer. So we went through the whole interview. We talked really well. It was very comfortable. It flowed nicely. But towards the end, he couldn't wrap his head around why I would want to go back to the entrepreneurial space, which is where I was at that point. He was at UBS, which was a massive bank, and he was in investment in that realm. So if I had understood more about his background, I would have understood, okay, there's going to be a gap between how he's going to understand my narrative and what I want to do and what he wants to do. He basically, told me, why would you want to go back to entrepreneurial space when you get your MBA from Chicago? You can go to all these big firms. And so it was at that point, it became kind of uncomfortable. And I said, well, I really am passionate about what I do, and it's something that I pursued my whole life. I've worked in small organizations and I love it. It's where I find the most meaning, but I couldn't bridge the gap between his experience and mine. So if I had done more research on him, I would have understood that. And so in the end, I didn't get the admit, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, always do your research before going to interview. That's a lesson. So we have a couple of questions. And the first one is, with recession looming, are you expecting a huge MBA rush and competitive pool this fall?
That's a good question. No, I'm not necessarily. It's funny because we had that question when COVID happened and people thought, oh, everyone's going to be applying, going back to school. But the problem was that no one had money to afford school. It's very expensive. And so they thought, okay, I'm just going to keep working. I'm happy to have a job. So a lot of the very competitive applicants aren't going to be applying because either they're going to think that, so you've got this economics issue going on there, they're going to think that everyone's going to rush back to school. But usually when you think that people are going to rush back to school, they don't. That's what I've seen in my experience. So it's not a bad time to apply. I've seen a lot, even this past cycle so far, all of my students are getting admissions. And it's a very high, and the bar has lowered slightly in that case, that a lot of people hadn't been applying because of the recession, because of these things coming. People are scared to spend the money on the degree. So I would not say that you're going to be disadvantaged if you apply this fall. I would say go ahead. If it makes sense for you in your career financially, then yes, go ahead and apply.
Cool. And the next question is from Ruthvik. Can I include my sports background in my CV?
Yes, absolutely. You should. That's a unique part of you that will stand out. So when the admissions committees are reading through applications, you want to find those unique things that not everyone's going to talk about sports. They're not going to highlight their background. I've had multiple successful candidates talk about sports. I had one student last year that he was the captain of the rugby team, and he talked about his experience there, and he wanted to join the rugby team at his chosen schools. So you absolutely will stand out if you talk about your sports background. So do it. Just associate your background and what you've done with organizations to legitimize it. So if you were on a team, that's where you would focus on it. If you're just doing it for fun, then I would tell you, go find an association that's doing your sport and make it official, because that will be easier able to go on your resume, and it'll show that you're part of a bigger community than just yourself doing things on the side.
Good. So Ruthvik, I guess that we answered your question, but if you have some comments, just please write them in the chat box. And we have a question from Imran. So can I share my profile here and get some school recommendation for round 3? So Imran, I recommend you to scan this QR code on the screen and leave your name and email for us. So our academic advisor will contact you soon and will help you to analyze your profile, and will give you recommendations for your round 3 application. Well, I don't see any more questions here. Oh yeah, one more from Vincent just came up. So could you share some more interesting questions that you would ask current students and alumni? I really liked your 2 examples before.
That's a good question. Okay, so let's see. Other questions to ask alumni and your interviewer. I would ask them, what are your long-term strategic plans for the business school? Are you going to add new programs? Will there be new centers coming up? That's a way of you seeing the school as a business. They want to expand. Are the class sizes going to get bigger? So for instance, when I went to Oxford, my class size was 236 people. And then the year after, they were adding another 100 people. And for me, I thought, oh my goodness, where are they going to put everyone? But that was interesting to know. And so I would ask them what plans for expansion you have. That's interesting just to know for your own curiosity. I would also ask things about the wider university and how it relates to the business school. That's something that I really enjoyed about Oxford, was that there's such a community even outside of the business school. So I would find out, whichever school you're applying to, how does the wider university factor into the business school, and what kind of interactions do you have? Because at Oxford, we had many seminars, opportunities, entrepreneurship opportunities where we could collaborate with students from the government school or from, astrophysics or something, So it was very interesting to always be able to access any area of expertise that you want to access. So I would definitely say ask them about that as well.
Good. I think we answered this question, Vincent. If you have any additional comments, just drop them into the chat. And so far, we don't have any more questions. So I guess if you have ones, just scan this QR code and leave the question for our academic advisors. And thank you so much, guys, for your time today. I really hope that all of these tips, insights, and hacks will help you to succeed in your preparation for the last master's and MBA rounds. And thank you, Caitlin, for your time and for your expertise today.
You're very welcome. My pleasure.
All right. See you, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.